Welcome to the Observe Day podcast, the show where we celebrate the days that matter. From holidays to meaningful observances, we bring you inspiring conversations, stories, and ideas to make each day count. Whether it's raising awareness, learning something new, or simply sparking joy, this is your space to explore the calendar in a whole new way. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I'm excited to share today's observance with you. Let's dive in. Today on Observe Day, we're celebrating Intelligent Automation Month, a time dedicated to exploring how automation and AI can transform industries, shaping efficiency and reimagining the future of work. My guest today is Michael Buckbee, an AI search expert, founder, and seasoned marketing leader who has spent nearly 2 decades at the intersection of technology and marketing. Michael's career has seen him work with everyone from the US Navy to Fortune 100 companies, YC startup, presidential candidates, and even rock bands. Today, he's the co-founder of Noahtoa, a platform that helps brands understand their visibility and reputation inside AI search engines like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, and Google Gemini. What started as a simple script to check how ChatGPT described its friends' companies turned into a breakthrough business serving search professionals and brands worldwide. Michael has unique insights into how AI is already disrupting Google's dominance and what it means for the future of SEO and why startups need to rethink how they position themselves in the world where AI search engines are the new front door to the internet. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Your company, Noahtoa, began almost as a joke. Can you share the origin story and why it struck such a chord with founders and marketers?
Yeah. So, this is now like a year and a half ago or more. I was involved with a different startup. We were trying to get off the ground in the cybersecurity space. And as part of that, as part of being a bootstrap founder, I'm in a lot of different networks with other SaaS founders. And we were talking about like, hey, I wonder what ChatGPT says about our company.
Yeah.
And a lot of the data was wrong. A lot of it was like the wrong competitors. What is it we actually do? What problems do we solve? And it was wrong. And so at the time, we just thought it was sort of funny. But then, as I thought about it more and more, just kept thinking like, this is the future. Like it's wrong. And people are going to think it's correct. They're going to trust it. And how do we change that? And so I went back that night and just wrote a little script that just ran on my Mac that hit ChatGPT's API, and I made a little spreadsheet and I sent it out to a few of the other SaaS founder friends, and was looking at myself and just went back to my sort of day-to-day work. And then I started to hear back from them as they started to have more and more people saying that they found their company and became customers because they were listed in ChatGPT. So then the founders came back to me and said, hey, can we get an update on the spreadsheet? Can we figure out what it really says? Can we optimize this? And that was really the start of my company. So,
wow, simple idea. And I'm in my head, I'm thinking, what if you didn't write a script? What if it's for you, it was just all a joke, but a joke in your head, and you didn't like actually say, "Oh, let's see where this leads to." Probably wouldn't have had no at all.
No. And it's one of those things where, it came out of a real use for myself, a real use from talking to people. And I still found that to be such a useful thing in terms of getting feedback and, trying to do the right stuff. There's always too much to do. So you have to chart a path through this. So, yeah.
Yeah. You've worked with many organizations, from federal agencies to startups. Now you're working with founders, marketers. What consistent lessons about technology and communication stand out from such range of industries and persons?
So, we're talking about this in terms of AI automation, and we haven't really defined like what it is we're automating. But I think some unexpected things that AI is really good at that don't get talked about enough are the things that are often really important. Something that always suffers is documentation. So if you're doing a big IT project, the documentation isn't there. And a lot of times that's because it's incredibly tedious to get. It's a pain. It's hard to do all of that. And that is something that AI really excels at. A tool I'm using a lot nowadays is Claude Code. And that just happens to be the one I'm using. ChatGPT has a similar tool called Codex. Microsoft has similar Copilot tools. But a lot of times now I'm finding myself not using it just for code, like, hey, generate this application or generate this script. I'm actually using it in a really interactive way. So, for instance, I could see using it inside of a company. A lot of times automation is done with PowerShell and Windows environments. You could actually ask Claude Code to, hey, I'm trying to find inactive users in my Active Directory. Hey, Claude Code, run a PowerShell command, find all of them for me, and then give me a list, and then just interactively like work through that kind of stuff, or have Claude Code make those sort of things, or write a little script for you to run and do stuff. And I use that all the time. Like a good example on the coding side is we do most of our work out of GitHub issues. So inside of GitHub, there's a bug, if there's a feature, they have this issues format and it gives it a number and you can set some labels on it. Well, those always get out of sync. People forget to put labels on. And so the biggest is just like, is this a bug or is this a feature? So maybe, once a week, I'll just ask Claude Code, hey, just go through all the GitHub issues. And if it's a bug, label it a bug. If it's a feature, label it a feature. And that's not code. There's no script. So it on the fly uses the GitHub command line tools to interrogate. Here's all of your issues. Here's all the ones without labels, reads the context and description of each issue, and then gives it the appropriate label.
Wow.
And that's a huge time savings. It would take me, let's just say, an hour to do that sort of reasoning. And it's so quick, it's very accurate for that sort of categorization task. And, there's no actual code, but it is automation. And I think we are just at the very beginning of seeing how this can transform lots and lots of different systems that we interact with all the time, that it's a pain to update, it's a pain to track. But that sort of thing where it's documentation, where it's, data entry, where it's, all these different information processes, I think are about to get a lot easier for everybody.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to spotlight. We're talking about automation and intelligent automation, and it is becoming more accessible compared to in the past. When one would hear the word intelligent automation, like, oh, it's for the guys, the software engineers and all those guys to figure out. But now I'm like, yeah, I do have some automations that I run. I mean, for my own business, like it took me a while to set up, and I'm like, okay, what if I actually spend some time to actually set things up? How advanced would the automation look like and be like?
So the framework for doing this within these tools, I think, is still being developed. A real interesting thing Claude Code has is subcommands. And that sounds sort of like intimidating, like, oh, I'm going to write this subcommand for, this AI agent thing, but it's really just a document. It's in Markdown, which if you're not familiar with is just like a text format that's a little bit structured where you say like, this is a header, this is a list, this is a to-do. And something you can do is actually have Claude Code write these for you. So if you want to do an automation, something that you're going to do repeatedly, it's something usually you iterate at. Your first version's maybe helpful, but not that good and kind of creaky. Your second version's better, your third version. So what I've been doing is creating these subcommands, using Claude Code to create them, to document my process, and then checking them into source control, and then using them across all my projects. So I actually have a subcommand for, hey, grab one of the issues from GitHub and then, work through it and determine like what the root cause is, create a plan, create a spec, check that with me, check if the code's up to date, create a new branch. And it just describes all that in English. Now, that's not specific to, what I'm doing. Almost anybody could use that. And if you're in another spot where you have, a team you're working with, if you're trying to get, processes like under control, you could write one of those commands and it would be, a huge jump up in productivity shared across the team. So
Before we dive deeper, I'd love to invite you to join the Observe Day newsletter. Every week, I send you highlights of upcoming observances, creative ways to celebrate, and behind the scenes extras from the shows. It's the perfect way to stay inspired and never miss a meaningful moment. Sign up today at observeday.com/join. That is observeday.com/join. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Yeah. I hear the word automation, intelligent automation. So someone who you have a company that's basically doing automation because tracking the appearances in ChatGPT and how well your company is doing well on ChatGPT. That's automation because I'm like, how do I go about doing that manually? That's a lot of work. I don't think I want to do. I don't think I can even do. Right? What are some of the misconceptions people have about automation or automating things or intelligent automation you've noticed?
I think one of the things is, I've often thought of programming is really just the process of logically breaking down something into a lot of steps. And that's a skill that you develop as a software developer, which is like, oh, someone will give you a spec, which is like, hey, we need to submit the form. And, then you're like, okay, is this the only version of the form? And then you ask them that and they're like, oh no, there's three versions depending upon,
Yeah.
where the person's going. And you're like, ah, okay, well now this is a whole more complicated problem. And so, and then you go through all the different pieces of that. So there's a couple different things I think that are interesting with respect to AI automation. One of which is that AIs bring a lot of context with them, which is really interesting, and that helps make the automations better. Um, as people, we can recognize often, hey, this looks like a company name versus a person's name. Like that's a very common mistake. People will, put the wrong thing into, places in a form. And that's a common like failure point in these automations. Well, traditional computing, if you were trying to figure out like, is this a person's name or is this a company name, you'd need to make like a giant list. Like, here's a giant list of common first names, common last names. And, we're in different countries. That's going to be a different list, so
Yeah.
already there's more complications. And same with company names. Well, that's actually a question you could use an AI for that would do a pretty good job of that categorization and much faster to develop than if you were using, classical sort of software development techniques. And that makes automations better, makes them more reliable, makes them easier to put in place. And that's the kind of thing that I say with context. Like, I didn't need to start this off by saying, like, hey, figure out what names are. It already has the context of what a name is. It
Yeah.
has a context of what a person is and what a company is. And we're still figuring out how best to leverage that sort of context in lots and lots of different areas.
Yeah.
But it's very valuable. And I think that's something that people don't really consider in the automations. So,
Yeah. Uh, with a lot happening with AI and the tools out there, most persons like, oh yeah, I could automate certain things in my life. I mean,
mhm.
I could put one or two things. These things take time and all that. But I feel like a lot of the time people start trying to like, oh, what tools should I use for this, and rather than actually understanding, asking themselves, what's my workflow like? What do I spend my time on? What could I automate? What could a machine be doing? And then say, okay, yeah, what tool can I use, right? And so they know they have this tool, they see all these processes, but like, how does that apply to me? Yeah, I'm still trying to know how that applies to me. What would you recommend as someone who you've been doing this, you've using this for a while? What would you recommend for someone just starting at automating their business, their work, their personal life? How do they approach it so that it's easier and it makes sense?
Um, my recommendation is, and this is so, a few interesting things I found is that in the non-technical people in my life, there's a few of them that have really taken to ChatGPT. And what they're automating is often a type of social interaction work. And so I have a lot of pharmacists in my family. And
Really?
so pharmacy requires a lot of communication to doctors who oftentimes maybe prescribe drugs that they shouldn't. And so the doctor will say, this patient should take this drug. The pharmacist says, hey, you didn't really consider they're already taking this other drug. And those have a
Yeah,
really bad interaction. Like,
yeah,
that's a really common thing that happens. And so they need to say in this very professional way, hey, we can't do that. It would kill this patient,
yeah,
and so they take and they put the email that they got from the doctor about, why didn't you give my patient this thing? And they
yeah,
have to make a response. So they use ChatGPT to make that response. They, use it to as a counterpoint for a lot of the stuff. Now that's still an automation. We don't really think of it in the same way as like an automation, like a conveyor belt with tools and stuff in it, but it's an
uh,
information automation. And that's kind of where I suggest most people start, because a lot of people do that kind of work and they kind of fret over it and it's hard to get started. The other thing I think um, that is a tremendous productivity boost and that AI is so good at is explaining things. Now, I use this a lot in the code, which is that I'm trying to work on something. One of the people on contractors or something gives me a chunk of code. It's 50 different files that have been edited and little bits and stuff. Like, what is this actually doing? What is the underlying code doing? What are these new changes are doing? And that's something AI is really good at describing in lots of different levels of detail. And we recently bought a house. There's a lot of changes and weirdness in insurance and trying to get stuff set. And so something my wife has been doing is actually taking screenshots of emails that come in and then sending them into ChatGPT. And that's interesting for a couple reasons. One, um, we normally think of like, we talk about context. How do you get the context of this process into an AI? And it's become so much easier where basically it can treat images the same as text. And so that's a really quick way to get a lot of information in. Like you can just take a screenshot and paste it in. You can, reference those inside of like Claude Code, even. You can, just paste images in. And that's a really interesting automation to like explain the implications of these three different types of insurance. What are they actually trying to say
Yeah.
here? And that's a big help. We had a real interesting thing. Like we were working on a project, like this project for my daughter, and she had this list of grocery items that she needed, and it was huge. It was like 50 different items, and we're trying to do an order for it. So she took a picture of it with her phone, and we're trying to get it into the computer for this spreadsheet. She didn't realize when she took the picture that it was at an angle, and she cut off the first couple letters of all of the handwritten words at the bottom of the list. And so now, if you do traditional optical character recognition or handwriting recognition, the response you would get back is like, instead of flour, FLOUR, you just get OUR. And that would be accurate because those were the only letters there.
Yeah.
But putting that into ChatGPT, it had all this context. It knows what a grocery list is. It knows what food is at this sort of raw conceptual contextual level. And so it correctly figured out the beginning of this list. And then when it saw OUR, it went, oh, this is probably flour, and put FOOUR. And depending upon your perspective, and a lot of software developers I know are angry at that. They're like, this is wrong. That data wasn't there. We can't trust it to add this data in.
Yeah.
But from an automation perspective, that's a huge win because otherwise you would have had this exception. You would have had to fix all this stuff. And so again, it's a way of handling this contextual inputs and outputs. And it's something a human would have figured out immediately. So it's more capability. It's better in that ways. And I think when you start stacking all these different pieces up, you get a much better sense of like what's possible with a lot of these things. And, hopefully everyone has an easier time with their jobs and their lives and their projects.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mike. You at the beginning of the episode, I did introduce that. Oh, you're the founder of Noahtoa. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, but
Yeah, Noahtoa. So
oftentimes when the last time I interviewed you, the question I was asking was, how do we adapt this for our business? How do we do this? How do we do that? But right now, I'm curious, how do we adapt that for our personal brand? Is it even important, or is it more like I wouldn't really recommend. It's not really that important. You should just focus on your business. What do you recommend?
So I think brand in general is becoming much more important with AI. And it sort of splits for two reasons. On the one piece for actual like AI optimizations, we're seeing, by far, I think the largest sort of agentic sort of practices that people are doing where they're using an agent to work on their behalf for things
Yeah.
online is in research. And Google's AI mode is that a lot of these different services like ChatGPT have a deep research mode where you're looking for something. And what's really happening is there's this, you can think of it as like a robot that's Googling for you. So we're so used to like, I have a problem. I sort of abstract out a question from that problem. I search for it. There's 3 links. I sort of summarize those 3 links by looking at them. And then I make another question or I'm satisfied with my answer and I go about my job. Well, the agent is doing that for us where we say, hey, I'm trying to do this task. It goes, okay, great. I'm going to ask some questions about that. And it goes out and it reads a bunch of websites. And then based upon its context, and another way of saying context is like its sense of your brand. And that could be, if it's personal, if it's looking for like a lawyer, a lot of lawyers have very personal brands, like what type of work they do. A lot of people professionally have that sort of thing. It will then use that to influence the results and relay that back to the person asking the question. In the context of businesses, it's very important to have a positive brand so that when you come up in the list, you're included. And for personal level, the exact same thing, that if you're looking for a job, someone's trying to find out about like, hey, is this a good podcast to be on? Is this
Yeah.
something positive? And I think right now that's still a very deliberate and explicit thing that we do, kind of like search, which is like, hey, we're going to go to this website, we're going to search for something, we're going to go to this, service and try to be a podcast guest. I think what we're going to see is a lot of this just happens automatically, that it's much more implicit, that like, hey, we booked a call, it's just going to
Yeah.
show up on my calendar like, here's this person, here's what they're about, here's the background on them, and I'm not going to like go and do a deliberate search for that. And that's going to just be everywhere for all our stuff, where right now like web search is still, I think, a very separate thing. And what's interesting is that all the AI services are doing a bunch of other stuff. People are using them, like I said, for like social interactions, for kind of almost therapy, for tasks, and they're using it for search. And so, out of that, we're seeing more and more just sort of things show up implicitly. And that's just going to be part of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for pointing it out. I think it's at the point where we realize that we'll no longer be interacting with, like for example, I might no longer be interacting with you. That if I have a brand and a business, that I I will be interacting with your AI, whatever the AI agent might be. And so the question is, how do I put my brand out there such that irrespective of the AI agent that is being used, they understand what my brand is, such that if anything, discussion, work, or action that requires them to look for a brand like mine, they would reach out and clearly know that, okay, this is what the brand is about and this is what we stand for. Is that what
Well,
you say?
yeah. So everything I just said, I think the other side of it is that because of the changes happening in AI search, having a brand and a voice, and like literally a voice that people hear on podcasts and
Yeah,
videos, and a deliberate point of view and voice in your writing, I think is becoming more important for marketing in general, beyond just the search portion of it, where the search part is really discovery. That's how people discover you. Like
yeah,
oh, this is a company that handles this problem. That's not usually how people make decisions just based on that. That's like step one. Step two is, oh, I'm going to read some things about this. I'm going to make decisions based upon the content they have and those other, you know, pieces of this. And that's really brand. And that's what gets expressed in social. That's what gets expressed as part of your email campaigns. And that's very valuable. So it's valuable on both of these fronts. So,
oh,
well,
mm,
let me just say this too about
okay,
the agentic stuff. Like, uh, I think that sounds like a weird future thing to a lot of people, but it's happening right
uh,
now. And again, so Google has like 1 billion people using these AI tools just as part of doing a normal Google search. AI overviews, AI mode. That's just how people are going to be searching for things, because Google has put it out there. So it's not like, oh, I got to put my super AI hat on and go do this. It's just happening. And we're seeing now also things like just this week, ChatGPT announced a new product service called ChatGPT Pulse, which interacts with your calendar and looks at news updates and looks at all of this, and then puts together sort of a daily update for you. So we've interacted a few times. You're on my calendar for this podcast and stuff. So something that could happen is ChatGPT Pulse could say like, hey, just to let you know, there's a new episode of Serve Day up. You should maybe go take a look at it. And that's this week. This week that goes live,
yeah,
and that's an agent. This is just sort of like a helpful thing that tries to figure out what's of interest and like, what's happening. And again, implicit, it just sort of shows up in Chat GPT. I don't have to say like, hey, check for podcasts that are new.
yeah. Oh,
So it's
oh,
interesting.
oh. Um, this is such an interesting concept, and it's something that I feel like those who get on early would really benefit from it. Where can listeners connect with you to learn more and also try out Noahtoa's free tool?
Yeah. Check out Noahtoa.com. It's KNOWATOA.com. And we have some free tools there. We have some frameworks about how to think about search and search marketing. And I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to search for me. Not a lot of Michael Buckbees. It's good for my brand to have a unique name. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight chatting with you. Thank you for breaking down and dumbing down intelligent automation to a level where we can all understand what the concept's all about. It's been an absolute delight chatting with you.
Oh, it was great. Thank you so much for having me on. This was
Yeah.
delightful.
That's it for today's episode of the Observe Day podcast. Thank you for spending your time with us as we explore today's observance. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend who'd love to celebrate life special days too. Don't forget to join the newsletter at observeday.com/join for more observance stories, tips, and updates. Until next time, keep finding meaning in every day.